and welcome to the launch of the new report of Gender 5+. My name is Agnès Hubert, and I'm the president of Gender 5+, and I will be your chair today. Gender 5+ is a feminist think tank which was created 10 years ago by 5 feminists on 5 issues which are relevant to European policies. We have so far produced reports which can be found on our website on gender-based violence, on Brexit, on party democracy, and we made a film on Eliane Vogelpolsky, a champion of women's rights in Europe. We're launching today our new report on the impact of the COVID pandemic on women. We are now sort of 7 permanent members of G5+, plus a stagiaire. Everybody's participating. Some of us are visible, some of us are not visible, but they're still there and they took part not only in the report, but they're taking part in this conference. G5+ is also assisted by non-honorary committee, which is made up of distinguished academics, politicians, and civil society activists. 4 of them will be our discussant today, and we are very happy to welcome Jane Jensen from the University of Montreal, Canada, Mieke Verlo from the University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands, Joyce Mushaban from the University of St. Louis, Missouri, and currently at Johns Hopkins in Washington, and will be joined in a few minutes by Gabby Bischoff, who will take part from the Munich airport. She's a member of the European Parliament. So, towards the gender recovery of the EU, writing on the impact of gender and the pandemic had become an obvious need by May this year, when we started thinking about this report. Many organizations had already realized was being produced. As a European feminist think tank, we realized this could be a turning point for gender equality. Either it would enhance existing inequalities or it could be an opportunity for major changes. This is what will guide our discussions today. In 15 minutes, I will give the floor to our discussants and then to you, our invisible guests. Please remember to send your questions to our discussants and to the next 2 speakers as well. We will introduce our report, Nelly Kamburi and Joanna Takmintzis. We're very grateful that Nelly, who is a senior researcher at Panteion University, has researched the issue and returned for us the report that we're discussing today. Thank you very much, Nelly. She'd been working on major European projects like MIGNET, GIMIC. She holds a PhD from the London School of Economics, and her interests include migration, gender, social movements, international relations, and critical political theory. She's published a book on gender, migration, and domestic work, and several articles on gender and migration and social movement, which made her a fantastic candidate for writing this report. She will present part 1 and 2 of the report on the impact of COVID and on the challenges to gender equality. Then Joanna Takmintzis, who is with us as well, will take over to present the suggestions that we made to transform the crisis into an opportunity. Some of the suggestions, I would say, to transform the crisis into an opportunity for women. Joanna is a founding member of Gender 5+, and in the early 80s, she was the co-founder of the Center for Research on European Women, which was based in Brussels. She's retired from a long career in the European Commission in Brussels, and she's now joining us from Athens in Greece. So, Nelly, you've got the floor.
Okay, thank you, Agnès. I would like first to thank Gender 5 Plus for giving me the opportunity to do research on such an important topic. For me, it was really exciting to see all the work that has been done already across the world on these issues, and I'm hoping that there will be more funding to further enhance research on gender and COVID-19. So I'm going to briefly present some of the main points of the report. Focusing basically on the impacts of the pandemic on gender equality, and also on the policy challenges that these impacts bring about. So let me start. Sorry, I need to share. So let me start with the impact and the societal and policy challenges. Although COVID-19 had a higher death toll amongst men, the pandemics had a significant and multi-layered impact on gender equality. And this was mainly because gender inequalities were amplified in many ways. And the most important of these amplifications we are trying to develop in the report. So the first impact was one that was widely discussed in relevant analysis, but also on the media, and has to do with gender-based violence. Social isolation and overcrowding that resulted mainly from the measures to combat COVID-19, often combined with alcohol and drug abuse, created the conditions for a rapid increase in gender-based violence. The threat of being infected by the virus and socioeconomic deprivation, which was caused by the slowdown of economic activity, intensified stress and economic dependency of survivors on the perpetrators of violence, and it made it. Sorry. It's okay. I will continue like that. Okay. I will continue in this way. So. So basically, survivors of gender-based violence were prevented from seeking assistance and blocking escape avenues. The second impact had to do with the women's exposure to COVID-19. While there were some male-dominated sectors at the forefront of the COVID-19 crisis, these were, for example, platform work or logistics, the majority of those who were working in the front line were healthcare and service workers, such as nurses, midwives, health facility service providers, such as cleaners, and people who do catering services, carers for children, for the elderly, also teachers, domestic workers, and shop assistants. All these people are in their majority women. So COVID-19 has definitely a differential impact on women. Another impact has to do with the gender gap in work-life balance, which became intensified because of the confinement. Women play a critical role to the response to COVID-19, not only as workers in frontline jobs, but also, and perhaps most importantly, as the majority of unpaid caregivers. Their workload has increased dramatically during the pandemic, not only during the lockdowns, but in general, even as the lockdowns eased, because public and private structures for work-life balance are no longer available to the extent that they were in the past. Another impact has to do with gender inequalities in the labor market. COVID-19 lockdowns and the ongoing pandemic are causing a global recession. The impact of this recession is not easy to assess yet, but it is very likely, and from past experience, we know that crises have had a greater impact on women, and especially on precarious women, that it will disproportionately and differentially affect women than men. According to the ILO, there are 4 sectors that are most likely to be hit by the COVID-19 crisis. And in these sectors, women are represented 40 to 50%. These are accommodation and food services, real estate and admin services, manufacturing, wholesale, retail, and trade. So at least in high-income countries, women who are often precarious, working as precarious workers in these sectors, are facing increased obstacles to their survival and well-being. Another impact of the COVID-19 crisis, which is not widely discussed but is very important, has to do with health, sexual and reproductive rights, as well as the rights of vulnerable groups of women. Despite the lower serious infection and mortality rates, many women became more vulnerable to physical and psychological stress, fatigue, and exhaustion because of the double burden of working and taking care of dependent and sick family members without assistance. At the same time, during the lockdowns, women's sexual and reproductive rights have come under threat. Women and girls lost access to contraception, safe abortion, and post-abortion services that were interrupted because of the lockdowns. Also, many pregnant women faced a lack of access to information, medical, and psychological support. Migrant, refugee, and asylum-seeking women are another group which has been deeply affected by the coronavirus crisis. They faced increased exposure to the virus, especially during the lockdowns, but also in their aftermath. Many of them were living in overcrowded detention centers, such as the recently burned down Moria Center in Greece, where they had no access to food, water, healthcare, and no option to physically distance themselves or follow hygiene rules. Similarly, women who found themselves in confined spaces, such as mental institutions or prisons, also faced heightened risk of contracting the virus and are also deprived of their access to relatives and other social relations. All these social impacts were reinforced by political impacts that were related to the state of emergency that was declared by many governments across the world in response, of course, to COVID-19. This state of emergency has been connected to undemocratic decision-making practices and anti-gender politics and rhetoric. In a context in which democratic values were being under threat, there was a serious risk that women's rights and gender equality would be marginalized. And this is something that we found that was happening in several cases. And also, there was a serious risk that gender issues would be completely erased from political agenda. And this was partially happened across the world. More broadly, however, granting authoritarian powers to national governments during the pandemic is especially alarming. And it's also something to think about with regards to future measures that will be taken, especially in the context of the rights of the ultra-right wing in Europe, which has contributed undoubtedly to the resurgence of anti-feminist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, and racist rhetoric. The examples of Poland and Hungary shows us that anti-gender politics are no longer just rhetoric, though. They're also translated into legislation and policy measures. Finally, the chronic underrepresentation of women and gender issues in decision-making has proved to be crucial for the measures that were taken against the pandemic. The underrepresentation of women is dominant across the EU at the national and local levels. This makes it difficult to achieve gender mainstreaming in decision-making. Moreover, only a limited number of women scientists and qualified medical professionals participate in the committees that make decisions about the pandemic. And this is despite the fact that the majority of those working in jobs critical for the response to the COVID-19 crisis are women. This is a major democratic deficit, and it's a blow to gender equality in the EU. So what are the main societal challenges that these issues bring to the forefront? First, there is the question of how to combat gender-based violence and its impacts. Second, there is the question of how to recognize the value of jobs in female-dominated sectors and the contribution of migrant women to recovery. Third, we need to address how to achieve a more equal gender sharing of care and domestic work between men and women. And this is not just a question of the private sphere, but also it's a question of politics. Also, we need to address how gender equalities will be dealt with in the labor market, especially as the recession deepens. Also, we need to take back control of women's health and ensure that sexual and reproductive rights, women and girls have access to sexual and reproductive rights, even in periods of lockdown. Most importantly, we have to stop the spread of anti-democratic and anti-gender politics in ways that will, especially in Europe, but also across the world. And finally, we need to increase the participation of women in decision-making and find ways to represent women in the bodies that take decisions about COVID-19. This set of complex challenges can only be addressed if gender equality is at the center of European responses to the crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nelly, for sort of very synthetic presentation of a very sort of exhaustive report. I'll now give the floor to Joanna Takmintzis.
Hello, and from me. Well, the first two parts of our report, as Nelly has said, excuse me, technical issue here, okay, has covered the 7 areas. We chose to focus on 7 areas of challenges and impacts. In the last part of this discussion, we are we're trying to focus on a broader rethink of how we should move ahead. The crisis is having a greater impact and is lasting longer than we, even all of us, believed when we started writing this report. And in fact, in a situation where lives, society and economies have turned upside down in such a radical way, we believe that we need to look at some more radical solutions and take this opportunity to work towards a more sustainable gendered recovery. This part focuses really more on EU level responses, because we have in fact seen that so far the responses at EU level of the COVID-19 crisis have been mostly gender blind. And we believe that this is really a major mistake and needs to be reversed. And we decided in this area not to focus on a checklist of things to be done, but really give an opportunity to move to wider thinking. There's a technical problem here. I can't seem to move the slides here. So there seems to be a technical issue here. We are focusing on 3 areas for our discussion and our rethinking. The first is the need to move towards a care-based economy. Excuse me. Okay. So following our feminist analysis and the new approach, as I said, we believe that it's very important that our economies move away from looking only at the driving force of competition. We have realized how important care is, as we will see, and this is really very critical. At the same time, we have seen that the lack of women's representation at all levels of decision-making during the COVID crisis has led to the results that we have seen, and that we, as will be discussed by a later discussant, women do have an important role to play. And parity democracy, it really brought to light the absence of parity democracy at the European level. And we believe there again that we need to look at parity democracy with the context of introducing quotas, however controversially that might be, as a measure to balance the inequalities. And in taking this wider, broader look and rethinking the future of our societies in the light also of the effects of COVID, and looking to the future, the effects of where the current economic system has led us, we believe that we need to challenge the belief in the unlimited economic growth, and we believe that we should use social and environmental indicators to guide decisions alongside DGP, and that we should move towards a different kind of economy. So very quickly, why do we focus on a care-based economy? I think it's been very clear to all during this crisis that care is an important economic activity and is at the core of EU societies. And the paid and unpaid health and care services are really essential, and they're mostly carried out by women. Access to healthcare is extremely important and a human right also recognized by the UN. And we have come to realize with the economic impacts also of COVID that economies and societies cannot be successful if only driven by competition. So we are, I'm giving you a very summary here. I think we really do need to read our proposals and our suggestions in the report, but we do believe we need a different approach, a policy approach at EU level and national level, more people-centered, respecting gender equality. Of course, we need new financial instruments. We need more public investment with gender budgeting and a new approach to our economies, using the care and health sector as a basis, a care-based economy. The second issue that we decided to focus, as I said, on these three critical elements of a forward-thinking, sustainable future. We do believe that parity democracy is very essential, and as we have discussed in a special report that G5 brought out, there can be no democracy without parity democracy, and that, as I said, women are underrepresented at all levels of decision-making in society more broadly, and in during the COVID period in general, we have seen it. We have seen, unfortunately, that despite all the efforts made over the last 20-25 years at EU level, gender is not mainstreamed in policies, it's not mainstreamed in funding. We still have great gender inequalities, and this is a democratic deficit. How do we move forward? We do believe, as I said, that we do need to take gender balancing measures, and we do need to address very seriously the issue of gender democracy on deciding the future of Europe and on the discussions that are taking place at the moment and in the future. The European Union's main institutions have already recommended member states to adopt gender quotas to improve the number of women in political decision-making, but that is a recommendation that has not really been taken up very substantially. We believe that the discussions on the future of Europe do provide an opportunity to introduce gender parity and gender democracy, and to this gender democratic deficit needs to be addressed. Now, the last section of this is our thoughts on radically rethinking our approach to the economy, and why? Because as feminists, we do want this economic recovery to lead to a sustainable and just Europe, focusing on health care and the environment based on gender equality. And what should be the basis of our new model of growth in Europe, and why has this current model failed? Well, we know that we have seen and we recognize as feminists that the pursuit, and environmentalists, as the pursuit of unlimited economic growth based on the production and consumption is no longer sustainable and should be recognized as such. And as we have analyzed, we believe that we should focus on the care economy, social needs and environmental protection. I think our not only the COVID crisis, but the environmental crisis in which we find ourselves because of climate change should make that clear, that what the carrying on as we have until now is not sustainable. And we believe that the fact that gender inequality is so much present in our societies and in our economies contributes to the unsustainability of the system. So we do believe that also this unshaken belief in the GDP as the only guide for economic decisions and societal decisions is really no longer sustainable, no longer possible, and we ask for environmental, social, and gender balance indicators to be used in decision making. Gender mainstreaming must be an integral part of all policies, including our economic policies, and also the gender budgeting should be used in distributing all financial resources. This is basically, in a very short outline, what our Section 3 is all about. We believe that Europe has failed to deliver the promises on gender justice that we have all been working towards over the last years. We still have a pay gap. There's unequal pay for work of equal value. We do not have equality on the labour market for millions of women working in precarious conditions and the majority of carers. We have glass ceilings in all areas of the professions. We have harassment. We have a number of issues that have been promised on equality and have not been delivered. The gender mainstreaming, which was a promise entered in the Treaty of Maastricht in 1997, is still mostly rhetoric. And we have, as been outlined very well in the first part of the report, so many issues, violence and women against women, and so many other issues on the labour market, in the distribution of tasks in between work and the home, and so many other areas where where fundamental changes are needed. And we believe that we need to look at not only individually these issues, and obviously measures can be taken on these individual issues in the current context too, but we believe that for moving forward in the future, we really need to stand back a little bit and take a feminist vision, take an approach with a feminist vision for the future, and challenge the way our economies have been run so far, and propose feminist alternatives. If anything, I would conclude by saying that the COVID pandemic has made us all come to terms with our shared vulnerability, and it has made us realize how many things still, how many new directions really need to be taken, and we have to understand our position in the world in a different way. And the future of gender equality in Europe really does depend on our ability and the ability of the EU institutions to take the lead, and in the post-COVID recovery period, put forward directions for a sustainable, care-driven economy governed by parity democracy, with gender budgeting and mainstreaming being an integral part of a new model for growth focusing on the care economy. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Joanna. We've now know more about what is in the report for those who had not read it before, but we'll read it afterwards. Thank you very much for your very synthetic presentation. We're just over a little bit over the time, but just 5 minutes. For those who've joined us later, we now going to give the floor to our discussants. I wonder, I can't see Gabby. Gabby Bischoff should have joined us as well. But we will go in the following order. First of all, Jane Jensen will sort of take the floor, then Mieke Verlo, then Joyce Mushaben, and then Gabby Bischoff. I will first of all introduce Jane. We've asked our discussants to talk about the issues in the report, and particularly about what we feel important for future action. And we're lucky enough that these are very much into their sort of lines of expertise. So Jane is a professor, Jane Jensen is a professor emerita from the Université de Montréal, but she's a very well-known specialist on social policies and women. She was a pioneer in the early 80s to write about care and carers, who cares, and she has since been consulted as an expert on many occasions. She's written multiple articles on European policies and gender, social policy, social investment as well, how was it sort of compatible with gender or not, and social innovation. Jane, I can't see you on screen. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I want to just share my screen, and then I will begin. So thank you very much for this opportunity to take part in the launch of this important and very detailed report. You heard in the last two presentations the extent to which it covers a very wide range of issues. I'm going to use my 5 minutes to focus on one of the issues which was raised in the report, and that's the call for a care-based economy, or what I'm going to call in this presentation a caring economy. And I'm going to go back over some of the material that is in the report, not in detail, but in order to talk about why we would need and want to think about a caring economy. It's important to remind us of some of the issues covered in the report. So first of all, what is a caring economy? And here I think that it's important to think of it as having two dimensions. The first dimension is an economy in which access to high quality care, broadly defined, is a citizenship right rather than a private good or a private familial responsibility. It's something that comes to people and is available to all citizens because of their status. And I'm using citizenship in a broad sense, not simply because they have passports, but because they're members of a society and they merit the solidaristic support of that society. The second dimension of a caring economy then, or this dimension of a caring economy then, is that it has a citizenship regime which ensures both access to and provision of care on the basis of equality as well as need. And I'm going to talk both about access and about need. The second dimension of a caring economy is that it's one in which the production of care and care work are valued. Care work is recognized as having economic value. The measures of the GDP and other ways of counting well-being include care rather than exclude it or put it aside in a caring economy. Care work is recognized as having traditionally reproduced gender inequalities. So this is an important factor that it's still the economies that we live with and have lived with through the pandemic traditionally reproduce gender equalities rather than reducing them. And therefore, in order to move to a real caring economy, it's necessary to have public interventions to create equal treatment and equal opportunities in the familiar areas of wages, employment status, and citizenship rights broadly defined. So the pandemic revealed yet again, and I emphasize the word revealed. Nellie talked about amplified, and that's indeed the right word. The pandemic revealed the gender inequalities in a basic right of social citizenship, access to quality care. Access and equal access to care is not yet, and has in fact in some cases been reduced as a right of full citizenship and as an expression of social solidarity. And these are some of the indicators that we might turn to. The inadequate staffing and the lack of protective equipment in institutions caring for the elderly, whether those are hospitals or other types of institutions. These were well covered in the media and in the reflection of the numbers of infections and of deaths. But what we need to remember is that for many of those institutions, the elderly are overwhelmingly older women. There's gender differences in the age profiles in these institutions. Secondly, the shutdown of networks of personal care workers affected both the women who do that work and those who need that care work. And these two groups are, again, as Nellie pointed out, overwhelmingly female. Thirdly, the closure of childcare services has had the predictable consequences for mothers' employment. So the second factor that we need to turn to is that the pandemic revealed again, amplified, that care work is undervalued. For those who are doing care work, the working conditions and status are very often unequal, and certainly the wages are low. Again, some indicators. Reliance on undervalued employees providing care exposed long-standing patterns of gender inequalities, and these have intersected with other forms of inequality and other forms of disadvantage. So the formal healthcare sector relies on many workers who actually have precarious employment status, despite the fact this is one of the major areas of public employment. The employees have precarious employment status, and this ranges from doctors and nurses to cleaners and food service workers, both at the top of the hierarchy and lower down. Secondly, there's a massive reliance on women as personal care workers for elderly and children. Thirdly, care work is often the primary employment opportunity for newcomers to the European Union, as well as to other northern societies. These include recent immigrants, these include migrants, and these include very often refugees. Finally, workers of immigrant origin, second, third, fourth generation workers of immigrant origin, many of whom are Black, people of color, people who are members of linguistic or ethnic minorities. These groups are also overrepresented in care work in Europe and in many other countries as well. So these are the groups that have suffered from the inequalities of status, conditions, and wages, and for whom there is now an opportunity to do more by moving towards a caring economy. So to finish my presentation, a caring economy for the future would ensure two things: high quality care is as a right of citizenship, and that care workers receive equal treatment. So a caring economy would guarantee high quality care to all as a citizenship right with support from the state and provided in stable and respectful ways. Again, citizenship in the broad sense of members of a society and not simply those holding passports. Secondly, a caring economy guarantees that care work is provided in accordance with principles of gender equality, equal wages, equal employment conditions, equal rights. A caring economy after COVID-19 in particular would recognize the contribution made during the pandemic by essential and frontline services by many women with precarious immigration status and intersectional disadvantage, and would provide policy tools to end them. So a caring economy with gender equality, as this report points out, is one that needs to have the opportunity of the pandemic. We need to seize that opportunity, and we need to do it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jane, for this very precise and excellent presentation on the caring economy, which is probably one of the things on which we're not precise enough in the report. How do we do it in particular? I like your right to citizenship in particular, but the carers are really those who need to be cared for, basically. I mean, looked after by public services. So I'm now going to give the floor to Mieke Verlo. Mieke, you're a professor at Nijmegen University. You've led major European projects with a lot of brio, like Magic, Queens, etc. And you've recently edited a book on the different forms of resistance to gender equality. So this is the issue on which we would like you to comment. All the anti-gender movements, all this resistance to gender equality, not only in Hungary or Poland, but all over Europe. I mean, how is it impacting on women not following the crisis, which is not finished, but within this pandemic?
Yeah.
Mieke?
Thank you for giving me the chance to speak here. And thank you, Nelly, for the report. Thank you, the think tank, for making all this possible. Thank you, Jane, for this wonderful expose on the caring economy. Let's hope we get there at some point. It would make a difference, for sure. The book that I made is called Opposition to Gender Equality, and I've called it Opposition because I think I would think there is a difference between opposition and resistance. There's always been resistance to attempts and processes that advance gender equality, but when it turns into opposition is when it starts to flirt around the edges of what is a democracy, and when it starts to try and roll back things that are part of human rights altogether. So I think what I want to stress today is that the COVID-19 pandemic and the responses to that have exposed the ongoing fragility of gender equality in the European Union. Against all this, the EU is a champion of gender equality. It's still a very fragile set of victories that have been there in the past. So there's an ongoing fragility, I think, of processes that advance gender equality. It has also exposed the fragility of the European Union altogether. And I think this is visible day to day. What has it done? It has enhanced and strengthened the opposition to gender equality, to feminism, to gender studies, as well as to equality in a more intersectional sense. And I think the report pays attention to that in the form of vulnerable categories, but I think the links between various forms of equality are even more strongly intertwined. This is contributing to a rise in various European forms of sexism, racism, homophobia, and class-based marginalization. And this has been strongest, but not exclusive, to countries where democracy was already weak or on the verge of extinction. So this is also rooted in pre-existing trends and therefore all the more worrying. This impacts on women's lives, and this is highlighted mostly in the report, but also on the lives of all European citizens that are in one way or another minoritized or stigmatized, and also on the lives of men that want a more gender equal life. And luckily for us, there are also quite a number of those. I think it includes Frans Timmermans, according to his own statements. The situation for poor women, for LGTB and non-binary people, and for racialized people is most urgent and at times life-threatening. So I repeat, COVID-19 has exposed the ongoing fragility of the EU and of gender equality processes in the EU. So what should be done? And I think it's great that the report includes ideas what to do. And I think there's like a double strategy needed. One strategy is top-down support. So this is all connected to a strengthening of the EU institutions themselves, a strengthening of the EU's commitment to democracy and to democratic values, and of possibilities for effective sanctioning of the breaches on these. And we've seen how difficult that is. This is part of the weakness of the EU, but we're in urgent need of such effective sanctioning. We also need bottom-up support. We need support to strengthen civil society, even against national policies that have already silenced it or threatened to silence it on an ongoing basis. And this is, I think, something we see not just in the east of Europe, but also in the west of Europe, connected to the state of emergency. We also need the EU to strengthen the politics of knowledge and academic freedom in the EU. It's just last week I signed a letter to the Romanian court because there is a strong attempt of killing gender studies in Romania. So the European Union should consider directly supporting such initiatives that are under attack, under direct attack from national governments. So I think intervention is urgently needed before all this is killed altogether. And the same would also count for press freedom. So to recapitulate, I think there is a need for top-down support, not just about gender equality, but about democracy and all the essentials for that, which is academic freedom, press freedom, the freedom to have NGOs and to function as NGOs and to have money as NGOs and get it from somewhere. Then also to try and strengthen the European Union so that breaches of all these threatening elements can effectively be sanctioned. And of course, there is also in the report some mentioning of initiatives that are already available for that. But I think it's urgently needed that they are actually used. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mieke, for this very insightful and political, I would say, intervention. There are sort of initiatives like sort of anti-discrimination, which is really coming to the fore on the European agenda very strongly. And so it's, it is something which is very much, the top-down actually is starting to be in the, certainly in the sort of agenda of the European Union. Now, without further ado, I will give the floor to Joyce Mashaben. I can't see you, Joyce, but I'm sure you're here. I saw you before. Joyce is an emerita professor from St. Louis University, and she's currently teaching at Johns Hopkins in Washington. She's what we call a Germanist, which means a real expert in German politics and particularly in gender politics. What she's best known for in Europe are her books on gendering the European Union, which she wrote with Gabrielle Habels, but as well sort of more recent book on Angela Merkel, Madame Chancellor, which I really recommend to everyone to read. I mean, it's an extremely good read, like a novel. And to see how Angela Merkel is sort of a feminist and in some ways, and but without sort of wanting to say it, and sometimes have been anti-feminist. She's also undertook about 3 years ago research on Ursula von der Leyen when she was Minister for Defense in Germany, and she's continuing her research, which makes her really this research very central to our preoccupations at the moment. So obviously, one of our sort of main field of expertise is women's leadership. We've talked about essentialism and talking about women's leadership, but Joyce's work helps us to go beyond this sort of dichotomy of feminist thinking and to sort of let us think about leadership for sustainable Europe. So, Joyce?
Thank you very much. One small connection. I'm now at Georgetown University in the Center for German and European Studies. I want to give Georgetown some credit for at least teaching me how to use Zoom. So that's an important thing. Quite all right. I have been struck by the assumption underlying the entire report that more women will result eventually in better policies for women, that more women as decision makers will result in better opportunities for gender equality. Now, this hope, this belief, this ideal has motivated me throughout my entire professional life, but I'm a political scientist, and I realize that correlation is not the same as causation. Being a woman does not automatically make you better at handling a global pandemic, nor does it appearing to be more compassionate or cooperative. During the early stages, the initial stage of this pandemic, the median per capita death rate in women-led countries did not differ statistically from the median mortality death rates in male-led states, although these rates were highly dependent on population density, healthcare access, testing, tracking, and reporting protocols. Now, Jane might agree with me that because we sit on this side of the Atlantic, we can think a little bit outside the box, and sometimes we can see patterns that people living in Europe do not. As thrilled as I am to be among these rock stars of EU feminism. So I decided to take a look at the activities of a few individual prime ministers in Europe, and I concentrated on Denmark, New Zealand, Germany, Norway, Iceland, and Finland. I threw in New Zealand because it also has a very strong female prime minister. Now we know that as of May 2020, only 19 out of 193 countries around the world had a female head of state or head of government. And only 14 of 193 national cabinets had at least 50% women. Europe has 6 out of 27 either heads of government or female heads of state at this point. But I don't think that we can automatically draw conclusions about the policies of those women either. So one of the first things I did was to actually look up and see what kind of a gendered impact there has been in the second and successive stages of this pandemic. Germany, which is led by Angela Merkel, has obviously a far lower death rate than that of the UK. And then we turn to a country like Denmark, which has 1/5, based on per capita figures, of the mortality rate. Finland, where there's also a female prime minister, governs with a coalition of 4 female-led parties. Finland has had 1/10 of the mortality rate seen in neighboring Sweden, which even refused to shut down. So there is at least some superficial evidence, and I put this on a PowerPoint, a very long PowerPoint that Agnes can share with you later on. But let me first address just some of the commonalities that I was able to observe among the women's behavior in this particular pandemic. First of all, again, as a political scientist, I have to insist that institutions matter. Most of these women had centralized unitary governments, and they also have relatively small populations. The big exception to that rule is, of course, Angela Merkel, who did very well in the first 2 stages, but the problem after that was that the heads of the 16 Länder, the states, then immediately wanted to become more actively involved. First of all, because these are their actual legal domains, managing healthcare, closing down or reopening the schools. And I also think there's some electioneering going on because Germany will have to choose a new head of the CDU and a new chancellor by the end of 2021. Germany is also exceptional in that it has a very large population, over 82 million. The second thing I noticed institutionally is that all of these countries where women are performing much better than male-led countries is that they have established, of course, very generous welfare states. And at least 3 out of these 6 women of the 3 Europeans that I was EU members I was able to track, not only had generous unemployment benefits, but in these cases, they also decided very quickly to directly subsidize wages rather than having people be fired or furloughed and then needing to draw upon unemployment benefits. A third commonality, they all had generously funded healthcare systems, and for the most part, at least compared to the place where I am right now, they had more than adequate healthcare supplies. They didn't have to go chasing all over the world to the same extent that my country is still doing it, just trying to get sufficient masks and ventilators. Although you have heard some contradictory remarks, or at least observations with regard to the larger report that seem to push against the argument I am making here. And then, of course, given historical prejudices against women as leaders, one could argue that these women probably had to be twice as good to get elected in the first place, which made them very decisive by the time they took over national office. And so when there was evidence of a growing pandemic, they immediately reacted and they shut down their countries in ways that proved much more effective than we have seen elsewhere. Let me turn quickly to questions of their leadership style. First of all, it's pretty obvious that these women possess emotional intelligence. They have gone out of their way to empathize with their own populations. Their speeches have had very personal components in them. They have spoken directly in facts to the people. And there are many really fun examples here. The Danish Prime Minister showed how she was personally affected by doing a little video of a dance with herself washing the dishes. I haven't watched the video. I sure hope her husband is in there doing the dishes with her, during a national lockdown sing-along. We also had the New Zealand Prime Minister declaring that the Easter bunnies were essential workers, holding press conferences directly relating to children to try to ease some of the fears in that direction. They showed themselves sitting in their homes or sitting on the couch talking about the methods that people should use in order to try to keep themselves safe. A second point that struck me was that these women all let the experts do their jobs. Now, I don't know how many of you have male partners or are married, but if you've ever driven with a man in a car who gets lost, you know how hard it is for a man to ask for directions. So in this case, rather than pretending that they knew it all or that they knew better than the experts, these women literally brought the experts in and let them do their own speaking. Another important commonality that I noticed here was that they were very proactive in bringing in other kinds of stakeholders. Denmark was one of the first countries to shut down. It was also one of the first countries to open its schools. And that process has been constantly forcing interaction among healthcare officials, state officials, and representatives of the teachers' unions. There has not been one decision that has been made sort of independently by one interest or stakeholder group or another. Another point that is particularly interesting here is that most of them not only talked about the lockdown, but they tried to anticipate an exit strategy. And while some of these countries are now going through a second wave, I'm sure that they are also trying to anticipate how they can present an end to all of this pandemic to other people. And a final point that I would like to make here is that all of these women practiced what they preached. As soon as Angela Merkel had been exposed by her doctor, who had been exposed to coronavirus while she was getting a vaccination, she immediately went into isolation. Compare this with Boris Johnson, who continued shaking hands with everyone and refused to wear a mask until it was way too late. Now, let me also add that when I heard that Angela Merkel got a pneumococcal vaccination being over the age of 65, to protect her lungs, I immediately went to the local pharmacy and got myself a pneumococcal vaccination, because if it works for her, it should work for me. Now let me draw my final point here. Clearly, women do not yet have critical mass in the Council, and we know that none of the recommendations that are being made here today will become EU regulations and laws without the approval of the Council. They don't yet have critical mass, but they probably have a lot of other female ministers spread across various councils. And so I would urge us to appeal to that group to forge a more direct link with von der Leyen, particularly during the German Council presidency, because without the Council, nothing is going to happen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I mean, it is really clear, sort of listening to all of you, how much gender equality sheds a new light and a much more human light on things that are happening. I mean, all the sort of recent discussions in the press about, I mean, the suffering, the emotional, the psychological suffering, etc. Could have been resolved, Joyce, wouldn't it? By having more women leaders, more women sort of making sure that there was sort of a proper feast for the children, more women sort of showing more emotional intelligence in general and caring more for people. Anyway, we should be joined, or we should have been joined already by Gabby Bishop. Gabby, well, I can't see her on screen. She's landed in Munich, and she should be with us. Gabby?
I am, Agnes. I can see you.
Super.
Yes. Can you see me? But I.
Super. Yes, we can see you, and we're very happy to welcome you on board. I wish you'd been here to sort of listen to all the sort of.
I already listened. I listened already since shortly after 6, so got some of the debates which are really good, and I think it's just the timing to do this debate. And I think it's very essential, because what we can see also when we look at the history of women's liberation, that developments for the good or for the bad always happened in extraordinary circumstances. If you look at the war in women's employment, or on the other hand, also positive developments like electoral laws in many European countries were after such an extraordinary period. But this is why I think we really, really have to make sure, on one hand, that we don't go, after this COVID crisis is over, back to the old normal, which was not sufficient if we look at EU policies. I also would like to have a rollback that is often in history connected to economic shocks. And here I have to say the worst is still to come. It's not yet there. I will refer to it later, but into a hope sustainable economy, also with parity democracy. And I think there are possibilities for all three, but it will depend on, someone said, on are we able really at this time with enough allies to lobby and to mobilize for this? Because I listened to the presentation before, and I have to say neither Angela Merkel nor most of the others engaged for a gender budget, neither in the Council nor somewhere else. I think the push will come much more from the outside, from civil society movements, and also partly, I think, from the Parliament. And here I would like to highlight, I read the report, I think it's very good, but I think it would be also worth to have a bit more intersectional approach, to see when we look at the crisis, it did hit women very different, depending their economic status, depending on their income, depending if they are vulnerable from a vulnerable group. And it did hit especially hard single mothers and single parents in general, because it was said before, institutions matter, and what we can see also how important these institutions, and especially in terms of schools, kindergarten, daycare, if they are not provided, it falls back on the women in most of the cases with serious consequences. So therefore, I think it will be also very important, whatever will happen in the pandemic, to make sure that it's worth to do a lot in terms of wearing masks and everything, to keep the schools open, the daycare, etc. But I'm rushing a bit also, because I don't know how long the connection holds, to say we have one big opportunity if we look about the choices, and that is that we will start soon, I hope in autumn, this conference on the future of Europe. And here it will be also one of the important issues can be the discussion on parity democracy be integrated in this, and to make sure the Parliament in their concept insisted that on the different institutional panels we have, or on citizens' agoras, huge debates with European citizens, that women have to be 50% everywhere, and not just a sort of one group within others. And the Commission is going to launch a huge interactive digital platform soon on this issue, on the Conference of Future of Europe. And it can be filled by everyone with the issues, the topics. So I think it's very timely here also to have this debate. And I think, therefore, especially in the recovery program now, because the future is not only the Future of Europe conference, but really the design of this recovery fund. And as you highlighted in your report, it is especially at the moment sectors that are hit very hard, where the majority of women workers are women. If you look at tourism and hotel sector, food sector, travel, what I'm doing now, a lot of administrations, we can already see also in some other sectors that a wave of restructuring is building up, that we make sure that half of the funds we have will be also invested in these sectors and not only in the male-dominated sectors here. So I think it's very timely, but it will be important. I saw different initiatives of gender organizations, women organizations, different NGOs to really have a joint strategy, because I think as long as we are not as noisy as the people that don't want to wear masks and complain, nothing will happen. I can see it in the Parliament. The gender budget question has not the support it would need, and I think it will be very important to be louder, more heard, have different initiatives, so that not my worst scenario I showed, not even returning back to normal, but having a rollback, I think is also a probable scenario here. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Gabi. There is a lot of questions, but I will now sort of let the floor to Alasne, to sort of who's been looking at the questions which has been asked so far. I will have one question myself, but I will come back later. I don't want to abuse my my privilege as a chair. We've got now 20 minutes for questions. Alasne, are you on board?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So thank you to all the discussants and the presentations of Joanna and Nelly before. We have received different questions from the audience online, and we want to thank them from because of their participation. Because Gabby is traveling, I would address the first question maybe to her, but maybe the other discussants can also think about the question if they wish. Gabby, if you can address this question from a participant online, it says, the EU is currently deciding on the future spending priorities for the next 7 years and beyond. It is proving difficult to get care organized as a priority, as well as gender mainstreaming in the whole budget and recovery package. So how can we galvanize our solidarity to put more pressure on the European Union institutions?
Yes, I could immediately answer this if you like. I'm sorry, it's a bit noisy here, but I'm at the airport. This is also why I have my mask hanging. I think, as I said, yes, at the moment, I think it would need much more public visibility and pressure, especially now in the negotiations of the Parliament, to really have a momentum for looking much stronger also at the care and I think sector. There is a good opportunity, because I think there is an awareness that it's not enough to go on your balcony and clap your hand, but it has to do also with initiatives for better pay also for the care sector, and especially many women are working there. And also on initiatives for gender budgeting in this debate. We have just a small window of opportunity that will close soon, so it is very important, and also to raise awareness in social media everywhere about this issue.
Thank you, Gabby. Yes, indeed, more visibility, and we have this small window of opportunity, as you were saying, so it's worth acting now, I would say. We have other questions, and I think Professor Mieke Verloo wanted to address one of these questions too. The question that I have just made, but also another question that was addressed to Mieke, which says, do you think that the pandemic has created more opposition for LGBT rights?
I think it has surely strengthened this opposition, and that's bad enough, because there is no way we have equal rights even for gay and lesbian and trans people in Europe yet. So they are in a much worse situation than women in the classic sense of what has been understood to be the case in Europe. So I think this is most worrying, of course, and most visible in the east of Europe, and especially in Poland and in Hungary, but also in Bulgaria and Romania. But it's also ongoing in other countries, and you see it with Vox in Spain. So you see that all far-right parties that are located at the fringes of democracy and almost outside of democracy for part of their membership and part of their program, they see their chances, they see opportunities to attack LGBT rights that are on the verge of existing or that are already there. So yes, the crisis creates a kind of like an invisibility cloak for them, right? So they think, oh, we can do it now. Nobody will pay attention. So so it's a real danger. So I think to make progress on gender equality, it's adamant that we make coalitions, that we make alliances with these organizations, that we make alliances with the Black Lives Matters in Europe groups, that we make alliances with all these people that are trying just as hard as the feminists do to make some progress towards equality. And that includes also those organizations of feminist men, because I think that presents a whole different picture often, and it can tip the balance somewhere between being heard and not being heard, because it makes it clear that gender inequality is not just a problem for women. It is a problem for men too. So that's kind of, but it is, I think, also what the European Union can also consider is a more short-term strategy to support those people in those countries that are targeted by this strong homophobic and racist opposition. Because that's, to gender mainstreaming, I love that strategy, and gender budgeting, I love that strategy, but those are long-term strategies. It takes forever. And sometimes you need to do stuff faster.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mieke, for your comments. More intersectionality in the answers, combined with also short-term solutions for the EU. Indeed, we are receiving now many questions, and I want to address 2 questions now for Jane, who is here with us too. So someone from the online audience is asking Jane, do you expect to have more mixed jobs in the care sector in the post-pandemic scenario, I assume? And also, what should be the priorities at national level in terms of the caring economy that you were addressing before?
Okay, thank you very much to the online participants for the questions. And first of all, and if I understood the first question, is it about would there be more mixing of gender patterns in the jobs after COVID? Is that was your question? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, well, I mean, one thing that we know from historical practice is that to the extent that the jobs improve, and are better paid, better conditions, become full-time, they're more likely to attract gendered mixed workers, because men as well as women would be interested in those kinds of jobs. We saw this happening, for example, as nurses became better paid and more protected. More men became nurses, and that's a good thing because it provides a different basis for care, and it doesn't create a care as a ghetto. And I think that breaking down the traditional ideological connections and ideational connections between care work and women can only be to the benefit of a more caring economy. So I think that would be a good thing to anticipate. Now, the questions about national budgets and what should be done. I mean, the first thing is that most of the things that are going to be done about COVID are going to be done at the level of member states, because that's where most of the responsibility relies. So rests. So the European Union can lead, can suggest, can encourage certain kinds of practices, but most of the actual budgeting decisions will be taken at the national level. And here we see patterns emerging outside of Europe as well as inside of Europe. And I think that one of the interesting reactions is and one of the emerging patterns is the recognition that the extent to which the care sector, both formal and informal, both hospital-based and other institutional, that care sector depended so dramatically on new arrivals, whether those were new migrants into the countries, or whether they were, in many cases, refugees who were establishing their place in the local labor market. And we've seen, as the report points out, we've seen the World Health Organization and others calling on a recognition of this by granting better conditions and better status to those workers. So I think that one of the things that national budgeting should think about is improving the conditions of care work, and included in that should be, and this isn't really so much a budget question as a recognition of status, but should include incorporation and mechanisms for incorporating those kinds of frontline workers into a recognition of status. And that, again, would move the arguments more in an intersectional direction, because it would be a recognition that the women who are doing this work are very often women who lack stability in their status in the country that they're working in. There are other things that should be done in the budgets, but I don't want to take too much time to talk about that.
Yes, thank you, Jane. I really like what you said. Breaking care as a ghetto, and of course improving the budgeting at the national level, which is going to be key for the post-pandemic scenario. Indeed, we have also another question for Joyce. Joyce, you were talking about women leaders and great leaders in the pandemic. So is there any lesson or what can the European Union learn from these leaders as the institutions in the European Union? Is any lesson that we could take from them?
Thank you for the question. Well, there is no one lesson, because there's no one size fits all in terms of a female leader's ability to respond to the particular conditions in her own country. But the one lesson I would take away from this, especially relative to what Gabi had to say, is that Angela Merkel has turned out to be quite a surprising advocate of gender equality in her own country, at least in terms of many of the policy changes. And it's just as striking that Ursula von der Leyen, who refuses to call herself a feminist, came up in her first inaugural speech with this widely, comprehensively addressed notion of gender equality, and her active support early on for the gender equality strategy. So we should never underestimate the capacity of women who don't look, talk, or think like feminists to help us advance the gender equality agenda. And my second point would be a direct appeal to those of you who have these kinds of connections, is that Angela Merkel is obviously in her last term. Europeans don't use the phrase lame duck, but she will be in office until 2021, probably September. And that means at this point in her career, she has nothing left to lose. She is not going to be running for re-election again. She understands the gravity of this crisis. The policy she has adopted in her own country have shown that she is committed to gender equality just because she thinks it's the fair thing to do. And so I would start to put even more pressure on her from within. Use von der Leyen, use Dalli to get to Merkel to try to bring about more of these changes, at least in the discussions and the negotiations that can go on within the council. I think she's a fabulous resource right now, and an undervalued resource, because people think conservative women really don't identify with gender equality. They have daughters. They also have sons they've tried to raise differently. And so that would be my overall lesson.
Thank you, Joyce. Indeed, do not underestimate conservative women, that maybe we will have surprises from them. We have many questions from the audience. I think, unfortunately, we will not have the time to address all of them. But if Gabi is still there, I would like to ask her one of the questions. How can the Conference on the Future of Europe expand gender equality and representation for a diverse future? Is Gabi with us? I cannot see her. Okay, in that case, we can pass to different questions. Here, let me see. Yes. this is a general question. A participant that is saying that women working at home are overstressed at this moment, and now it seems that many employers are seriously thinking about changing working to teleworking as a way of saving money. So how can we address that? I also assume how can we do it from the institutions and with the different policy and law instruments that we have. This is a general question. I don't know if anyone in particular wants to answer. Jane? Thank you, Jane.
I think that, thank you. I think that's an important question because there's a lot of talk about changing the whole, that the new normal will be a different form of work. And I don't really have any position on whether teleworking is good work or not. I think that we need more studies about that. But what we do know is that the fact that you're at home working doesn't mean you don't have exactly the same needs for services that you would have if you were working in an office. So that it cannot be allowed to become an excuse for reducing access to non-parental childcare, to after-school care, and all of the things that we've known for years and years are absolutely necessary if we're going to have any kind of equality within families, whether those are single-parent families or two-parent families. So I think that one of the things that would be an important research topic would be to turn to a study of teleworking's capacity to, and the ways that it's being used or not used to run a kind of assault on the provision of necessary services for reconciling work and family and necessary support for the reconciliation of work and family as a shared responsibility of parents.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, thank you very much, Jane, for your points on teleworking. So I think we have a little time, so I will appreciate, Mieke, if you could give us a short answer, and after Agnes might be able to wrap up our session. Thank you, Mieke.
Yeah.
We cannot hear you, I think.
Oh, you're mute.
Okay. I think in the Netherlands I saw an initiative where in a certain sector they agreed that everyone working at home would have an allowance that was quite substantial. I remember something like €350 or something to cover all these extra costs of that come with working at home. So I think it's a good idea what Jane says to somehow monitor not just exactly what happens, but also the demands that are made, at trade union level or council level within employers. So I think there must be more than, and there is like a laboratory outside in society right now. So let's find out.
Thank you, Mieke, for your answer. Indeed, many fields to explore, new regulations maybe on teleworking and new research to be done on that. So thank you to everybody for answering your questions. And now I will give the floor to Agnes, the president of Gender 5+, who will wrap up the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elasne. And I want to thank can you hear me? Yeah? I want to thank the audience, and I want to, for their questions, and I particularly want to thank our speakers, our discussants, and honorary members of Gender 5+, for their very, very sort of to-the-point interventions and their proposals, etc. I mean, this has really re-energized us to sort of fight harder and higher. And I think we do need, Gabi has really been very sort of forceful as well in telling us that this is now the time when we need to transform this crisis into an opportunity for feminism activism. at European level. So just as a matter of, sort of a practical matter, we will, for those who want it, who agree, we'll put your PowerPoints on the website. And I hope we can find an interactive way as well for further questions on this through the mail address on our website. I do want to thank you all. It's just 7 o'clock and we're keeping in time. Goodbye, and let's continue these discussions in other forums, and let's continue to carry this report as well, which we see can be very useful to the knowledge of all our decision makers in particular, but civil society activists as well. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.